Today, we're really honoured to have Lieutenant Colonel Robyn Fellows. As a pioneer, Robyn made the uncommon choice to serve 38 years in the Australian Army, breaking new ground in 1999 as the first Australian woman to earn the Commando Green Beret. Her memoir, Wings of Change, and her career from global deployments to her significant role as a military gender advisor underscore her relentless pursuit of inclusion. Through her story, Robyn embodies the spirit of inspire inclusion, championing efforts to empower women within the military and advocate for systemic change. So, Robyn, it is such a gift to have you here to share your insights, not only in being a woman in the military, but also leadership, and also the mindset of a person who has shown incredible resilience in the face of overcoming adversities. So welcome, Robyn, and I'm so glad that you wrote your book, Wings of Change, because I did read that at one time you weren't going to publish this, and that you stepped in and you've taken this bold step to share all the vulnerabilities from your personal life and your experiences within the military to inspire others. So I'd love it if we could start with your journey, of becoming Australia's first female Green Beret, which in itself, let's be honest, that's a remarkable achievement. So can you share what you would say were your pivotal points in the journey, what motivated you to keep going to what you achieved?
Absolutely, Gayle, and thank you for having me on this podcast. So when I think about it, I think there were two pivotal stories or actions that happened in my life that put me on the path to becoming first of all, the first female commando and my career as a gender advisor in the military. And the first one was I had actually only been in the Army for 6 months. And I remember we were getting a brief from this Special Forces warrant officer, very experienced warrant officer, and he was briefing us on guerrilla warfare. And he was explaining what guerrilla warfare was, that it's small teams that go into a country, they engage with the community, they train them, they maybe arm them, and then they conduct a specific mission. So at the end of his very good brief, I actually put my very shaky hand up in the air and I asked him if there were any women in these special forces teams. And he just looked at me and he said, "Of course not." And I was looking back at him going, well, why wouldn't they have women in these special forces teams who are engaging with the population? The population is 50% men, 50% women. So why wouldn't they have women in these teams? And one thing I certainly knew at that time is men talk to men and women talk to women. And you only have to look at an Australian barbecue to understand that. But that is certainly the same if you look at any society and culture around the world. So we actually left his presentation and he was shaking his head at me and I was shaking my head, of course, on the inside. But I took that knowledge away with me, as I didn't think that we were having our true capability with not having mixed special forces team, that we would be lacking a capability, a capacity. And so the second thing that happened a few years later, I was actually my first operational deployment to Bougainville. I was now a captain. There was a crisis in Bougainville, a civil war, and I was part of the regional response, and we were called the Peace Monitoring Group. So to provide context, so Bougainville is primarily a matrilineal society. So that means that the land passes from the women, between the women. And this was one of the main root causes of this conflict, which was the men were taking that land and giving it to the Australian gold and copper mine that was operating in Bougainville at the time. And that was one root cause. There obviously were other contributing factors. So we sailed to Bougainville and we were trained on the ship. We learnt the language. And I remember when we arrived in Bougainville, we were told to quickly get off the ship because the Bougainville peace delegation was coming onto the ship because of the great facilities on the ship, so they could continue the peace talks. And I remember standing there and watching the Bougainville peace delegation walk onto this ship. And I remember going, there are no women in this peace delegation. I have just been learning it's matrilineal society. Where are the women in this delegation? And I parked that again and I went out into my area of operations where I was a patrol commander and we were engaging with the chiefs and the leaders of the villages. And of course, as you'd expect, they were all male. So I made a decision as the patrol commander that I would get my second in command, who was Fijian. And I asked him to engage with the men on the peace process, and I would engage with the women because once again, I would see and I expected we would get the same responses. I couldn't be so wrong because the men were saying to my 2IC, hey, the peace process is going tickety-boo, we're returning the arms, everything is going wonderful. And the women were saying the opposite. They were saying they had a security situation. There were armed gangs were roaming the island. They were being raped. Their daughters were being raped. They had no freedom of movement. They couldn't move outside of their villages. Therefore, they couldn't contribute to the peace process. So it was really a fraught security situation for these women. And so I went around my area of operations and I got the same response from all the women. And that is when I asked the women, I said, how can I help you? And they said, we need to get together. We have no means we have no freedom of movement. We just can't get together and talk about the peace process and talk about the security situation. So I went to my boss, who was actually a New Zealand Lieutenant Colonel, and I said, sir, we have a security situation. This is what the women want me to do. Can I do it? And he said, no, you can't. That is not part of our mission. And I said, well, I think it is part of our mission because they need to be part of the peace process. And he said no 2 more times, and the third time, I think I must have worn him down, and he said, okay, but you do it in your own time. And I was very happy, being a very good signals corps officer. I would, in my time off, I would write messages to our headquarters. I got additional helo support, helicopter support, boats, vehicles, and I was able to there was about 300 women. We were able to bring them into our camp, and my boss was very good in that respect. He let me bring them into our secure situation. It was a secure compound, large compound, where the women could all gather, and they gathered there for several days, and they spoke about the peace process. They spoke about the security situation, and as we know, people who are suffering from the security situation usually have the best solutions to resolve the security situation. So I must say, I sat back at the end of that gathering, and I just thought we had missed something within this within our mission. We had deployed into this country with no plan to engage with the women as part of that peace process. And that was in 1998. And I'm not sure if your listeners are aware, but the UN Security Council resolution, Women, Peace and Security, that came out in 2000, where there is and it talks about disproportionate, where women and girls are disproportionately affected by conflict. And that was certainly what I saw in Bougainville. So, Gayle, those two pivotal situations set me up for when I was approached. I just returned from Bougainville, and I was approached by this Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel, and he said, would you do the commando selection course? And after those two experiences, it was very easy for me to say, yes, absolutely, I will participate in that selection course. And off I went. I started the training.
And what was that like? I mean, to go into that training, reading in your book, it sounded, from an outsider that, that's not in the military, horrific, and intense. What was your experience of that training?
I really enjoyed it, I must say. They give you the training. It's a 3-month. It's a 3-month program. Unfortunately, at the time, I was really busy. I was in a demanding staff officer posting, so my training would be done in the evenings and on the weekends. So it was a lot of walking with packs to up to 20 kilometres. There was a lot of gym time. But one thing I did know from my experience as an athlete when I was growing up was I knew that men and women are physiologically different. So I'd seen in the military, men can do pull-ups all day, women can do sit-ups all day because we have a lower centre of gravity. So what I did, I changed my program slightly in that I did more upper body training so that I could at least compete in that area, and that it was no longer would be something that would hold me back when I conducted the selection course.
Yeah, that's brilliant, because that really kind of is a testament to looking at what is required of the role and being able to, rise to meet that. So I love that reflection. In looking at it, it's very powerful behind the scenes, because I know many listeners here, we don't get the opportunity to talk to somebody who's in the military and done it at such a high level as you have. In sharing your message in your book, and I know that you described it at some points being quite vulnerable, what are you hoping to achieve by sharing that message that you were putting out in your book?
I wanted to inspire people, and I might take a step back here. When I wrote my book, I focused on my military career. So I sat back. I'm old school, so I got a piece of butcher's paper and I put what I thought were pivotal stories. And once I put them all on the butcher's paper, I realised that the common theme was change. I had been advocating for change, empowering people to change, giving people a hand up to change. So that was why I called the book Wings of Change. And it also is a play on the Green Commando wings, which we call the Green Moth. So I'd written, once I sort of got down those professional stories, I looked at it and I thought, well, what got me to do these things? What empowered me? What gave me that drive to want to help people who couldn't help themselves? And so I had to look at my childhood, and that was difficult, I must say. You say you've read the book, and thank you for doing that. So when I was writing about my childhood, I found myself crying a lot, and I'm not a very good typist, so crying and typing wasn't very good. So I actually had to change and start freehand writing to capture the stories, and I would type up my notes at night. But writing about the domestic violence that my father perpetrated against primarily my mother, but also myself and my three sisters, that was difficult. Spending a childhood walking on eggshells was difficult, but I think that was the start of becoming resilient. It was a start of becoming disciplined. And we had to learn because of those experiences to actually just focus on what was important. You know, we learned not to sweat the small stuff, to prioritize things. Also, writing about getting to a point where you actually consider ending your own life, that was difficult too. But I did finish the book, and it was so cathartic. It was like this weight had been lifted from me. But as you said in your opening comments, I nearly did not publish the book. I thought, great, this has been good. It's been a cathartic experience. I'll just file it. And I recall on the Friday, I had to make a decision on the Monday whether I would publish it or not. And I sat down over the weekend and went back to the reason, why had I written that book? And it was because I wanted to help people. I wanted to inspire people who may have you know, suffered or maybe had domestic violence in their childhood. And I wanted to make it clear that, you know, your past does not define you. It makes you who you are, but it does not define you. So I made a decision. I had a couple of glasses of red wine, and I made a decision that by the Monday I would publish the book. And I must say, Gayle, I'm very happy that I did. I have had so many texts, emails, and letters. I can't believe people still write letters, but they do. And people spoke about those areas in the book that resonated with them. So, yes, I am very happy that I wrote the book, and I also pray that that book gets to the people that it needs to get to.
And as I said, I read the book, and some of the listeners might not know that I've equally know you from that time and know your family and the people in the story. And I know I got very emotional when I read it, because I remembered snippets of, you know, like you and your sisters joking about going out the window, but not understanding why. And it really brought forward to me about that part about how we don't speak about those things, that it stays behind closed doors. So I'm particularly very grateful that you had that courage and that ability to be able to speak this out and put it in writing to inspire people for those situations. And it really showed, you know, I this element of wanting to bring safety and protection to people. Do you feel that kind of it was core to that inspiration of your leadership that you just spoke about in the military?
You know, I have not actually thought about it like that, but you are absolutely correct. Because when I looked back at what Mum did for us, you know, taking the bashings, she was protecting us while we were running. We were running away so we wouldn't hear the screams. And she protected us. And we couldn't protect her. We were kids. So, yes, that did drive me. I guess that has been an underlying driver to where I am now as a military gender advisor, where my job is to work in areas of conflict, post-conflict, where I protect the vulnerable population. So, Gayle, thanks for bringing bringing that to my attention. I really appreciate it.
I can say, as you know, Helen, your mother was a very special lady, and I'm sure if she's looking down, she'd be a big smile on her face and very proud of all that you've achieved with that, you know, and carrying that forward. If we then look at women and leadership, can you give examples of how you navigated then those obstacles that can come up with that during your military career, and I suppose what you really learned from it?
I mean, that's a great question. I guess I would use an example here as a military gender advisor when I was in South Sudan in 2018. And what we do when I deployed into the country, I first of all had to do a gender analysis, and that was to work out what I would do in support of the mission. And I trolled through the data, and it became very clear to me that 60% of the violations, conflict and sexual gender-based violence was being perpetrated against the civilian population by the security forces. And of those, of that, 97% were being perpetrated against women and girls. So I took that information and I chose my mission would be that I would engage with the women in the Sudanese Peace Liberation Army. And the reason I did that is I knew from my training as a gender advisor that if you have women in a security force, that they over the long term will have a positive impact on the actions of that security force. Mm-hmm. So in the short term, I was empowering and educating the women, which is what they asked me to do. So in order to be able to carry out that role, I also had to engage with all of the civilian pillars, the Senior Women's Protection Advisor, the Child Protection Unit, the Civil Affairs Unit, in order to be able to conduct my role. And so I think when I think of leadership, it was getting clarity within that situation where I was as the gender advisor, and then working out what my role was within that environment, who I needed to influence within that massive organisation in order for me to contribute to the mission, which was protection of civilians and enduring peace. And I believe that my main effort, which was empowering and educating the Sudanese Peace Liberation Army to be able to contribute more meaningfully to the defence of their country, was the first step in what is a long process of organisational change.
I'm just hearing so many gems in what you're saying in terms of having that, you know, knowing the much bigger vision, really knowing your outcome and your capacity to observe and to look for opportunities. You know, even from a very data sort of base, it was just not pin the tail on the donkey, if I can use that term. You literally went and looked for the evidence and looked for the data to be able to direct your energy and your focus, which is extraordinary in the way that you're able to navigate all that pieces of information and then influence the people that you needed to. And it brings up a question to me that, you know, to face those obstacles and to go in and into, you know, some very challenging environments that you've had, you know, how did you know, we often talk about the term resilience. And I'm curious from your perspective, even as a leader, what does resilience mean to you?
Thought about resilience and you know, what is the essence of resilience? But thinking about it, it's your ability to overcome adversity. And I think, like courage, resilience just doesn't happen. It's built up on what your beliefs are, what your standards are, and that happens over time. So that would be my first point. My second point with resilience would be, and particularly as a woman, is we need to trust in our ability to overcome adversity. So trust our ability to figure things out, so that if we have enough time or garner enough support or training, that we can overcome whatever adversity comes our way.
Would you see that would be in part then, having that, is it that belief in that you can go through that, but also the element of hope attached to it? Would that be in part of that as well?
Yes, I think your belief systems are really important, and I think believing in something higher than yourself is very important. For me, it's my Christian faith, but it could be just believing in something higher than yourself. And with that absolutely comes hope, because you know why you're here. Your faith gives you, you're here, you have a plan. There is a plan for you in this world, and your job is to execute that plan, and that gives you hope. So when adversity comes, and it will, you will overcome it with enough time and training. You will overcome that adversity. We are never given anything, I believe, whilst we're on this earth, that we can't deal with. I honestly believe that. So it's about sitting down and working out how we're going to overcome that particular adversity.
I love that whole piece, that, really, and, I always had this philosophy that life brings things for you, not to you, and rephrase it in that way. So as you were developing in your leadership, did you have anybody that, like a role model or a mentor that particularly inspired your leadership or your direction as you went through the challenges within the military and developing along your path?
Absolutely. I remember being a junior captain, and my commanding officer was great in developing my leadership style at the time. And he gave me, amongst several books, but there was a book, I think it was called The Three Monkeys, but it was just about how people want to get the monkey off their back and put it on your back. Mm-hmm. And for us, as keen professional military officers, we want to solve problems. So what he taught me was to listen, and I would listen to the problems, and instead of what I wanted to do was reach over, grab the monkey off the back of the person with the problem and me just solving it, I would leave the monkey with them. I would give them some broad guidance, and both of us, I learned to listen, and the junior officer would go off and learn from, learn in creating solutions to resolve problems. The second piece is also, as a keen military officer, we want to win. We want to achieve a result with everything we face. And what he taught me was, you don't have to win every battle. You want to win the war, but you don't have to win every battle. And I've certainly found myself giving advice as I see these keen officers going, well, no, this is right. Yes, you may be right, but you're not the commander, and the commander will make the decision. So that was the second thing. He was my commanding officer. He was quiet. He had a great sense of humour. So I took from that this very sort of quiet, effective style of leadership, which I have tried to emulate over the years.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So many learnings that you've shared in that particular one about, the roles and the characteristics even of a leader. To kind of finalize and to bring things to a close, and I'm wondering, from your perspective, looking at the future of women in, just in leadership, per se, going generally outside of the military, but just looking at women in leadership, what would you say is a true benefit for organizations fostering their female leaders?
That's a great question. I have always said that men and women are different, and our differences are our strength. So in an organisation, we don't want groupthink. We want diverse thoughts. And I can definitely tell you, having worked 38 years in and out of the military, which is a primarily male organisation, that diversity of thought is critical to achieving the best courses of action. So I think women are critical in any organisation where you need to have diverse thought and achieve the best course of action, particularly in my world where you're dealing with the population, where you're dealing with dealing with a vulnerable population, men, women, the elderly, the disabled. We need to have diversity of thought. I think I'm thinking that the other thing I would say here, I remember when I was first in the military, and as a young officer, I remember looking up to the highest, and I saw there were 3 women across the 3 services, Army, Navy, Air Force, and none of them had children, and they had all married fellow servicemen. So I thought, well, there's a cost to reaching the highest levels. Now, thankfully, over the last 38 years, that has changed. So for instance, I know women commanding officers now, they are given an allowance so that they can hire au pairs, etc., so that they can compete on the same level as their male colleagues. So yes, the organisation has changed for the better, I believe, and then because of that, and certainly we have in the Army, we had our first female Lieutenant General, which is just wonderful, and she was a colleague of mine at Command Staff College, and she is absolutely up for the task. So I think we will have a better organisation because of having women from the top through to the bottom at leadership roles at all levels, that are contributing to designing the best solutions for our organisation, and it's certainly there already.
And I'm taking away from that, it's really support the leaders so that the leaders can support the vision and the mission and the outcomes, which I think it's a great takeaway in that, bringing and enabling women to be able to elevate in that role and not be penalised because they're women and having children. So that's a great point, I think, to kind of to wrap up that diversity piece. So I truly want to thank you, Robyn, for sharing with us today. And I'm sure people are going to have a lot of questions, or perhaps going, oh, I wish you could have asked that question. And I would always, if you're listening to this, please just, send in, if you've got a question, and I can always, forward that to Robyn so that we can or invite Robyn back. And I'm just winking as I say that, and she's looking at me with a smile. You invite Robyn back to talk about, specific things that you'd really love to hear about. So with that, again, thank you so much, Robyn, for your time, your wisdom, and all your insights that you've shared with us today.